The idea of winning is often misunderstood. We picture trophies, applause, money, status, and visible success. But when you look closely at people who consistently win in life, a different pattern emerges. Their advantage is not luck, talent, or timing. It is psychological. Long before outcomes appear, before results become obvious, these people think differently. They interpret situations differently. They respond differently under pressure, uncertainty, and temptation. This book is about that invisible edge. Psychological advantage is the quiet force shaping decisions when no one is watching. It shows up in how you process information, how you manage emotion, how you delay gratification, and how you choose your actions when the path is unclear. Most people focus on external strategies. The people who win focus inward first. They build clarity before speed, discipline before motivation, and patience before reaction. This is not a book about being ruthless, aggressive, or dominant. It is about being precise. It is about learning how your mind works, where it fails, and how to guide it deliberately instead of letting it run on autopilot. Advantage does not come from doing more. It comes from thinking better under the same conditions everyone else faces. Throughout this book, you will explore the mental habits that separate consistent winners from perpetual strugglers. You will learn how advantage compounds through small decisions made repeatedly, often unnoticed. You will see why some people seem calm in chaos, clear in confusion, and steady when others collapse. The goal is not perfection. The goal is alignment. When your thinking, emotions, and actions move in the same direction, winning becomes less dramatic and more inevitable. By the end of this journey, you will understand why advantage is rarely loud, why it is often invisible, and why those who possess it need no proof.
Chapter 1. Self-Awareness as Advantage. Most people believe their thoughts simply happen to them. An idea appears, a reaction follows, and action feels automatic. But the people who consistently gain advantage understand something crucial. Thoughts are not facts. They are patterns, and patterns can be observed, questioned, and reshaped. This is where psychological advantage begins. Your mind is constantly interpreting reality. Two people can face the same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions, emotions, and decisions. The difference is not intelligence or experience alone. It is how their thinking is structured. Many losses in life happen long before action is taken. They happen at the level of interpretation. A challenge is labeled as a threat instead of an opportunity. A delay is seen as failure instead of preparation. A setback becomes an identity instead of feedback. Self-awareness means learning to step back and watch your own thinking in real time. It is the ability to notice when your mind rushes to conclusions, exaggerates outcomes, or clings to familiar narratives. Without this awareness, you live inside your thoughts. With it, you gain distance. That distance creates choice. People without self-awareness react. People with self-awareness respond. That single difference compounds over years. It affects relationships, careers, money, health, and confidence. When you understand your thought patterns, you begin to see which ones serve you and which quietly sabotage you. This process is not about judging yourself or trying to control every thought. It is about recognition. Once a pattern is visible, it loses some of its power. You no longer mistake it for truth. You see it as a habit of mind. Advantage does not start with bold action. It starts with quiet observation. The moment you can see how you think is the moment you begin to outgrow the limits of automatic behavior. Once you become aware of your thought patterns, the next step is learning how to refine them. This is where critical thinking becomes an advantage rather than an academic concept. At its core, critical thinking is the discipline of slowing down your mind enough to examine what you believe, why you believe it, and whether it is actually true. Most people never do this. They inherit assumptions, absorb opinions, and mistake familiarity for accuracy. Critical thinking begins with questioning automatic conclusions. When something feels obvious, emotional, or urgent, that is often a signal to pause. Strong reactions are rarely signs of clear thinking. They are signs that emotion or habit has taken the lead. People with psychological advantage do not eliminate emotion. They prevent it from hijacking judgment. Another fundamental principle is separating evidence from interpretation. Facts are what happened. Interpretation is the story you tell yourself about what happened. Losing this distinction is where many people create unnecessary fear, anger, or discouragement. A missed opportunity becomes proof of failure. A disagreement becomes rejection. Critical thinkers notice this shift and correct it. Clarity also requires intellectual humility. Advantage does not come from being certain, it comes from being accurate. This means accepting that you can be wrong, that your perspective is limited, and that changing your mind is not weakness, it is precision. The fastest learners are not those who defend their beliefs hardest, but those who update them most efficiently. Critical thinking is not about overanalyzing everything. It is about applying effort where it matters most. Important decisions deserve depth. Emotional moments deserve delay. Repeated problems deserve new angles. When critical thinking becomes a habit, confusion loses its grip. You stop reacting to noise and start responding to reality. This is how self-awareness turns into strategy, and why clear thinking quietly separates those who struggle from those who steadily win.
Chapter 2. Invisible Losses. Many of the biggest losses in life do not feel like losses at all. They feel logical, justified, even necessary. This is because the mind is not a neutral observer. It is filled with built-in shortcuts designed to conserve energy, not reveal truth. These shortcuts are known as cognitive biases, and they quietly shape decisions without asking for permission. A cognitive bias is a consistent error in thinking that pushes perception in a predictable direction. Confirmation bias leads you to seek information that agrees with what you already believe. Negativity bias makes negative experiences feel stronger and more memorable than positive ones. Availability bias causes recent or vivid events to seem more important than they actually are. None of these biases are signs of weakness, they're signs of being human. The problem begins when bias goes unnoticed. When that happens, you stop evaluating reality and start defending a version of it. You dismiss opportunities because they do not fit your expectations. You repeat mistakes because they feel familiar. You confuse confidence with correctness and certainty with clarity. Advantage erodes quietly in these moments. Overcoming cognitive bias does not require eliminating it. That is impossible. It requires interrupting it. The first interruption is awareness. When a belief feels emotionally charged or unusually certain, it deserves examination. Ask what evidence supports it and what evidence might contradict it. Ask whether you would reach the same conclusion if the situation involved someone else. People with psychological advantage create space between stimulus and judgment. They resist the urge to label situations immediately. They gather more information before committing to a narrative. Over time, this habit reduces unnecessary conflict, improves decisions, and sharpens perception. Bias thrives in speed and certainty. Advantage grows in pause and curiosity. The more willing you are to question your own mind, the harder it becomes for invisible losses to control your outcomes. Problems rarely defeat people because they are too complex. They defeat people because they are approached emotionally, impulsively, or without structure. When pressure rises, the mind wants relief, not resolution. Psychological advantage comes from resisting that urge and applying method instead of reaction.
Effective problem-solving begins with clarity. Most problems feel overwhelming because they are poorly defined. A vague problem creates vague thinking. People rush to solutions before they understand what is actually wrong. Those with advantage slow down long enough to isolate the real issue. They separate symptoms from causes and stop trying to fix everything at once. Once the problem is clear, structure replaces chaos. Breaking a challenge into smaller parts reduces emotional intensity and increases control. What feels impossible as a whole often becomes manageable in pieces. This shift alone restores confidence. You move from feeling trapped to feeling engaged. Another critical technique is reframing. The way a problem is described shapes the solutions you can see. If you frame a situation as a failure, your options shrink. If you frame it as feedback, new paths appear. Reframing does not deny reality, it changes your relationship to it. Effective problem solvers also delay judgment during idea generation. They allow imperfect or unconventional options to surface before evaluating them. Creativity dies under immediate criticism. Evaluation comes later, once possibilities exist. This sequence matters more than most people realize. Finally, action completes the process. Advantage is not endless analysis, it is thoughtful movement. A small, well-chosen step provides information that thinking alone cannot. Progress clarifies what works and what does not. When problem-solving becomes systematic, obstacles lose their emotional weight. Challenges turn into puzzles rather than threats. Over time, this approach builds trust in your ability to handle complexity. That trust becomes a quiet form of confidence, and confidence is one of the most reliable advantages there is.
Chapter 3. Thinking Clearly in a Noisy World. We live in an age where information is constant, loud, and often contradictory. Opinions travel faster than facts, and confidence is frequently mistaken for truth. In this environment, the ability to analyze information clearly becomes a decisive psychological advantage. Without it, the loudest voice wins. With it, reality does. Every argument has a structure, whether it is spoken, written, or implied. At its simplest, an argument contains a claim, the reasons supporting that claim, and a conclusion. Most people react to the conclusion alone. They agree or disagree instinctively, without examining how it was built. Advantage begins when you slow down and examine the framework beneath the message. Analyzing information means separating what is being asserted from what is being proven. A claim is not evidence. A statistic without context is not proof. A confident tone does not equal accuracy. When you train yourself to ask what supports a statement and whether that support is reliable, manipulation loses its power. This skill also requires attention to common reasoning errors. Some arguments distract rather than persuade, appealing to emotion, fear, or identity instead of logic. Others rely on false comparisons or oversimplified choices. Recognizing these patterns prevents you from being pulled into conclusions that do not hold up under scrutiny. Clear analysis does not make you cynical, it makes you selective. You learn to reserve judgment until enough information is available. You become comfortable saying you do not know yet. That restraint protects you from reacting to incomplete or misleading narratives. People with psychological advantage do not consume information passively. They interrogate it calmly. Over time, this habit sharpens judgment, reduces confusion, and creates a sense of internal stability. When others feel overwhelmed by noise, you remain grounded in structure, and structure always favors those who can see it.
Engaging with perspectives different from your own is one of the fastest ways to strengthen thinking, yet it is one of the most avoided. Disagreement feels uncomfortable because it threatens identity, not intelligence. When beliefs become tied to ego, opposing views feel personal. Psychological advantage comes from separating ideas from self-worth and treating disagreement as information rather than attack. Every perspective is shaped by experience, incentives, fears, and priorities. When you encounter a viewpoint that clashes with your own, the instinct is to defend, but defense shuts down learning. Those who gain advantage learn to listen first, not to agree, but to understand how another person is reasoning. Understanding does not weaken your position, it sharpens it. Engaging diverse perspectives exposes blind spots. No matter how intelligent or informed you are, your view is incomplete. Others see angles you cannot, simply because they stand somewhere else. When you collect these angles, your picture of reality becomes more accurate. Accuracy is more valuable than comfort. This process requires discipline. It means resisting the urge to interrupt, correct, or perform certainty. It means asking questions that clarify rather than trap. It also means being willing to update your position when better reasoning or evidence appears. Changing your mind is not losing, it is refining. People without this skill become rigid. They surround themselves with agreement and slowly mistake repetition for truth. Over time, their thinking narrows and their decisions suffer. People with psychological advantage remain flexible. They can hold multiple perspectives without confusion and choose their position deliberately. Engaging with diverse perspectives does not mean all views are equal. It means all views are examined. When you can listen without collapsing and disagree without hostility, you gain social intelligence and mental strength. In a world divided by noise and certainty, this ability quietly separates those who stagnate from those who continue to win.
Chapter 4. Decision Dominance. Decision-making is where thinking becomes reality. Every outcome traces back to a choice, whether conscious or automatic. People who consistently win do not make more decisions, they make fewer, clearer ones. They understand that decision quality matters more than decision speed, especially when stakes are high. Effective decision-making begins by defining what actually matters. Many choices feel urgent because priorities are unclear. When everything feels important, confusion follows. Advantage comes from knowing your values, long-term goals, and non-negotiables before pressure arrives. This turns decisions into alignment checks rather than emotional gambles. Another key principle is separating reversible decisions from irreversible ones. Some choices can be adjusted later, others cannot. Treating every decision as permanent creates paralysis. Treating permanent decisions casually creates regret. Psychological advantage lies in matching the level of caution to the true cost of being wrong. Uncertainty is unavoidable, but it can be managed. Strong decision-makers think in probabilities rather than guarantees. They ask what is most likely, not what is perfectly safe. They consider second-order consequences instead of focusing only on immediate relief. This wider view reduces impulsive mistakes. Emotion is the most common threat to good decisions. Fear pushes avoidance, excitement pushes recklessness. Advantage does not come from suppressing emotion, but from delaying action until emotion settles. Time creates clarity. Finally, commitment matters. Once a decision is made with care, second-guessing weakens execution. Winners decide deliberately, then move forward fully. They evaluate outcomes later, not mid-action. When decision-making becomes intentional, progress accelerates. You stop drifting between options and start directing momentum. Over time, this consistency compounds, and what looks like luck from the outside is simply the result of clear choices made again and again. This discipline turns pressure into leverage and confusion into steady forward movement.
Mental resilience is the ability to remain steady when circumstances are unstable. It is not about suppressing emotion or pretending difficulty does not exist. It is about maintaining clarity, direction, and self-control when pressure rises. People with psychological advantage are not immune to stress. They are simply trained to recover faster and respond better. Resilience begins with understanding that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is often a signal that growth is occurring. When challenges appear, many people interpret strain as failure. Resilient thinkers interpret it as resistance, something expected when moving forward. This shift alone changes behavior. Emotional regulation is central to resilience. Strong emotions narrow attention and distort judgment. Learning to pause before reacting allows intensity to pass without dictating action. Time, even a brief pause, restores perspective. This is why resilient people rarely make their worst decisions in their most emotional moments. Another pillar of resilience is meaning. When actions are connected to long-term purpose rather than short-term comfort, endurance increases naturally. You tolerate difficulty more easily when you understand why it matters. Purpose turns effort into investment instead of sacrifice. Resilience is also built through evidence. Each time you survive a difficult period, you collect proof of your own capability. Reflecting on past challenges reminds you that discomfort is temporary and manageable. This memory strengthens future resolve. Finally, resilience requires self-respect. You cannot repeatedly abandon standards and expect confidence to remain intact. Keeping small promises to yourself builds internal trust. That trust becomes stability under pressure. Mental resilience is not dramatic, it is quiet consistency. Over time, it becomes a competitive edge because while others burn out, panic, or retreat, you remain present and capable. In a world that rewards steadiness, resilience ensures you are still standing when outcomes are decided.
Chapter 5. Long-term advantage. Delayed gratification is one of the clearest markers of psychological advantage. It is the ability to resist immediate reward in favor of a greater future outcome. Most people understand this idea intellectually, but few practice it consistently. The reason is simple. Short-term rewards are emotional and vivid. Long-term rewards are abstract and distant. Advantage belongs to those who can hold the future clearly enough to guide present behavior. Long-term thinking begins with recognizing the cost of immediacy. Many losses are not dramatic, they are comfortable. They come from choosing ease over effort, relief over progress, and pleasure over purpose. These choices feel harmless in isolation, but they compound quietly. Over time, comfort creates stagnation, while discipline creates momentum. People with long-term advantage make decisions based on trajectory rather than mood. They ask where choice leads, not how it feels in the moment. This perspective changes daily behavior. Skipping preparation, avoiding discomfort, or chasing distraction becomes harder to justify when you see their cumulative effect. Delayed gratification also strengthens self-control. Each time you choose long-term benefit over short-term impulse, you reinforce the belief that you are capable of restraint. This belief matters. Identity follows behavior. When you act like someone who can wait, you become someone who can win longer games. Long-term thinkers also reduce emotional volatility. They are less shaken by temporary setbacks because they measure progress over seasons, not moments. A bad day does not define direction. A single win does not guarantee success. This steadiness protects focus. Delayed gratification is not denial, it is strategy. It is choosing investment over consumption and patience over panic. In competitive environments, this ability creates separation because most people trade the future for the present without realizing the exchange. Those who think long-term quietly accumulate advantage, while others wonder why progress never seems to last. Emotional control separates temporary performers from consistent winners. Pressure compresses time, narrows attention, and amplifies emotion. In those moments, the mind looks for escape, certainty, or validation. Psychological advantage comes from resisting those impulses and maintaining internal order when external conditions are unstable. This skill is not natural, it is trained. Emotional control does not mean indifference, it means awareness without surrender. When pressure rises, emotions signal importance, but they do not provide direction. Acting directly from fear, anger, or excitement usually produces decisions that feel urgent and later require repair. Advantage belongs to those who can feel intensity without letting it dictate behavior. The first step is recognition. Pressure creates predictable reactions. Some people rush, some freeze, some seek reassurance. Knowing your default response allows interruption. Once recognized, a pause becomes possible. Even a brief delay slows emotional momentum and restores access to reasoning. This pause is small, but its effects compound. Breathing, posture, and physical stillness matter more than most realize. The body and mind are not separate systems. When the body settles, the mind follows. Simple physical regulation can prevent emotional escalation and preserve clarity during high-stakes moments. Preparation is another pillar of control. Pressure feels overwhelming when situations are unfamiliar. Repetition reduces uncertainty. People with advantage rehearse difficult scenarios mentally before they occur. When pressure arrives, the situation feels known rather than threatening. Finally, emotional control requires values. When decisions are anchored to clear standards, pressure loses leverage. You are no longer deciding who to be in the moment, you are executing a choice already made. Under pressure, most people become smaller versions of themselves. Those with emotional control become clearer versions. This difference explains why some individuals rise when it matters, while others collapse. Pressure does not reveal character, it reveals training.
Chapter 6. Discipline and Focus. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, punishment, or rigidity. In reality, discipline is freedom applied consistently. It is the ability to choose what matters most over what feels easiest in the moment. People with psychological advantage rely on discipline not because they lack desire, but because desire is unreliable. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline remains. Competitive environments reward those who can perform without needing emotional readiness. Discipline creates that reliability. It removes negotiation from daily decisions. When standards are clear, action follows automatically. You do not debate whether to show up, prepare, or follow through. You simply execute. This conserves mental energy and reduces friction. Discipline also protects focus. Every distraction carries a cost, not only in time, but in attention. Repeated switching fragments thinking and weakens momentum. Disciplined individuals design their environment to support effort rather than test willpower constantly. They reduce unnecessary choices and make desired behaviors easier to repeat. Another overlooked benefit of discipline is self-trust. Each time you keep a commitment to yourself, even a small one, you reinforce the belief that your word matters. This internal trust stabilizes confidence. You no longer rely on external validation because you have evidence of consistency. Over time, this quiet confidence becomes visible in posture, tone, and decision-making. Discipline does not eliminate rest or flexibility. It defines them. Rest becomes intentional rather than escapist. Flexibility becomes strategic rather than reactive. This balance prevents burnout while preserving progress. People without discipline often wait for clarity before acting. Disciplined people act to create clarity. Movement reveals information that thinking alone cannot. Progress sharpens direction. In the long run, discipline compounds more reliably than talent. Talent creates opportunity. Discipline converts opportunity into results. When pressure rises and conditions change, discipline remains the advantage that does not depend on mood, circumstance, or approval.
Focus is one of the most valuable resources you possess, yet it is treated casually by most people. Attention determines what you notice, what you think about, and ultimately what you act on. When attention is scattered, effort becomes diluted. Psychological advantage comes from directing attention deliberately instead of allowing it to be constantly pulled by urgency, novelty, or noise. Focus begins with recognizing that not everything deserves your mental energy. Many people feel exhausted not because they do too much, but because they attend to too many irrelevant things. Worry, comparison, and distraction consume attention without producing progress. Advantage grows when you learn to protect focus as a finite asset. Clear priorities are the foundation of attention management. When priorities are vague, everything competes. When they are defined, focus narrows naturally. This reduces decision fatigue and emotional friction. You are no longer reacting to what appears loudest, you are responding to what matters most. Environment plays a critical role. Willpower is unreliable under constant temptation. People with advantage structure their surroundings to support concentration. They reduce interruptions, limit exposure to distraction, and create physical cues that signal when focus is required. This turns discipline into design. Sustained focus also requires tolerance for boredom. Meaningful work often lacks immediate stimulation. Those who cannot tolerate boredom seek relief and lose momentum. Those who endure it gain depth. Over time, depth outperforms intensity. Attention management is not about constant intensity, it is about rhythm. Focused effort followed by intentional rest preserves clarity and prevents mental fatigue. Rest is productive when it restores attention rather than fragments it further. When focus becomes habitual, progress accelerates. You move faster not by rushing, but by eliminating unnecessary detours. In competitive settings, this ability creates separation because while others are busy everywhere, you are effective where it counts. Control attention, and you control direction.
Chapter 7: Social and Strategic Intelligence. Social intelligence is the ability to understand people beyond what they say and respond in ways that align with reality rather than assumption. Power dynamics exist in every environment, whether acknowledged or ignored. They shape conversations, decisions, and outcomes subtly. Psychological advantage comes from seeing these dynamics clearly without becoming consumed by them. Most people either deny power altogether or obsess over it. Both approaches lead to blind spots. Socially intelligent individuals observe first. They notice who speaks freely, who hesitates, who influences direction, and who follows momentum. These patterns reveal more than words. Power is rarely announced. It is expressed through behavior, timing, and silence. Understanding this allows you to navigate situations without unnecessary conflict or submission. Social intelligence also requires emotional regulation. Strong reactions distort perception. When you are defensive, eager to impress, or seeking approval, you lose leverage. Advantage comes from neutrality. Calm presence communicates confidence without confrontation. It allows others to reveal themselves while you remain grounded. This does not mean manipulation, it means accuracy. You respond to what is actually happening rather than what you hope or fear is happening. Another component of social intelligence is recognizing incentives. People act based on perceived reward and risk. When you understand what someone values or avoids, their behavior becomes predictable. This insight helps you choose when to speak, when to wait, and when to disengage. Silence, used intentionally, often carries more influence than explanation. Boundaries are equally important. Social advantage does not come from constant agreement, it comes from consistency. When your standards are clear and your response is steady, others adjust. You become reliable, not reactive. Over time, this earns respect without demand. Social intelligence is not charisma or charm, it is awareness applied with restraint. In competitive environments, those who understand power dynamics without being ruled by them move with clarity. They avoid unnecessary battles, choose strategic moments, and preserve energy. This quiet control often determines who advances and who stagnates.
Strategic patience is the ability to wait without losing intent. It is not passivity or hesitation, it is restraint guided by awareness. Many people mistake speed for effectiveness, believing that immediate action signals confidence. In reality, premature action often reveals insecurity. Psychological advantage belongs to those who can pause while others rush, observe while others react, and move only when timing aligns with purpose. Strategic patience begins with understanding that not every opportunity is yours to take. Some doors open as tests, not invitations. Acting too quickly can expose priorities, weaken position, or create unnecessary resistance. When you wait, information accumulates, patterns emerge, leverage increases. Time becomes an ally rather than an enemy. This requires emotional control. Impatience is usually driven by discomfort. Silence feels awkward. Uncertainty feels threatening. Waiting feels like losing ground. Those without patience act to relieve these feelings rather than to improve outcomes. Those with patience tolerate discomfort long enough to see clearly. In social and competitive environments, timing often matters more than content. The same words spoken too early can fail, while spoken later can shift direction entirely. Strategic patience allows you to choose moments when influence is highest and risk is lowest. This applies to conversations, negotiations, decisions, and personal goals. Patience also protects energy. Constant engagement drains focus and creates noise. Stepping back preserves clarity. It allows you to respond selectively rather than reflexively. Over time, this selectivity builds a reputation for steadiness. People begin to notice that when you speak or act, it matters. Strategic patience is strengthened by long-term perspective. When you are not desperate for immediate validation or outcome, waiting becomes easier. You are no longer chasing urgency, you are managing trajectory. In a world addicted to immediacy, patience creates separation. While others expose themselves through haste, you gain advantage through restraint. When action finally comes, it lands with precision rather than force.
Chapter 8. Identity and Standards. Identity is the invisible framework guiding behavior when no one is watching. People act in alignment with who they believe they are, not who they wish to become. Psychological advantage emerges when identity is shaped deliberately rather than inherited unconsciously. Most people operate from outdated self-images formed by past experiences, labels, or early failures. These internal narratives quietly set limits on effort, risk, and ambition. When identity remains unexamined, behavior follows predictable patterns that reinforce the same outcomes. Standards are the behavioral expression of identity. They define what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you refuse. Low standards are rarely announced. They show up as small compromises, rationalized delays, and accepted excuses. High standards are equally quiet. They appear in consistency, boundaries, and follow-through. Advantage comes from aligning standards with the version of yourself you are committed to becoming, not the version you have been comfortable maintaining. Self-image shapes response to difficulty. When challenges arise, people with fragile identities interpret struggle as evidence they are not capable. Those with stable identities interpret struggle as part of the process. This distinction determines persistence. A clear identity absorbs pressure without collapsing. It provides continuity when motivation fades. Updating self-image requires evidence. You do not change identity through affirmation alone. You change it through repeated action that contradicts old beliefs. Each time you act in alignment with higher standards, you weaken outdated narratives and strengthen a new reference point. Over time, behavior reshapes belief. Identity then reinforces behavior, creating a self-sustaining loop. People with psychological advantage protect their identity carefully. They avoid environments that erode standards and seek contexts that demand growth. They are selective about influence because they understand that identity is contagious. In competitive settings, clarity of self-image reduces hesitation. You no longer ask what you should do, you act from who you are. When identity and standards align, discipline feels natural, decisions feel grounded, and progress becomes predictable rather than accidental.
Mental toughness is often misunderstood as relentless pressure, constant intensity, or emotional suppression. In reality, true mental toughness is sustainable. It is the ability to remain committed without destroying clarity, health, or balance. People with psychological advantage do not grind endlessly. They manage energy, not just effort. Burnout happens when pressure is applied without recovery or meaning. Toughness without burnout begins with knowing why you are enduring discomfort. When effort is connected to purpose rather than ego, it becomes easier to sustain. You are no longer proving yourself, you are building something. This distinction reduces emotional friction and preserves motivation over time. Mental toughness also involves flexibility. Rigid persistence breaks under changing conditions. Adaptive persistence adjusts while maintaining direction. This allows you to respond to setbacks without abandoning standards. You stay committed to the goal while changing the method. This adaptability prevents exhaustion caused by fighting reality instead of working with it. Recovery is not weakness, it is strategy. Rest, reflection, and recalibration are part of long-term strength. People who neglect recovery confuse fatigue with virtue. Over time, this erodes judgment and increases mistakes. Those with advantage schedule recovery intentionally because they understand that clarity requires capacity. Emotional honesty also matters. Suppressing stress does not make it disappear. Acknowledging strain allows regulation. When emotions are processed rather than ignored, they lose intensity faster. This keeps pressure from accumulating silently until collapse. Mental toughness is reinforced through self-respect. You do not need to punish yourself to progress. Consistent effort guided by clear standards builds confidence without cruelty. This creates resilience that lasts. In competitive environments, many people burn bright and fade quickly. Those who master mental toughness without burnout remain effective longer. They are present when others withdraw. Over time, endurance becomes advantage, not because they worked harder every day, but because they stayed clear, capable, and committed when it mattered most.
Chapter 9. Inevitable Winning. Living with psychological advantage is not about dramatic transformation or visible dominance. It is about consistency in how you think, decide, and respond across ordinary moments. Advantage shows itself quietly, in conversations you do not rush, impulses you do not follow, and standards you do not abandon. Over time, these small moments shape outcomes more reliably than bursts of intensity ever could. When psychological advantage becomes internalized, effort feels lighter because resistance is reduced. You no longer fight yourself as often. Decisions align with values. Actions follow intention. This alignment creates momentum that feels calm rather than forced. You are not constantly correcting course because you are not constantly drifting. Living this way also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Unknown outcomes no longer trigger panic, they trigger curiosity. You trust your ability to adapt because you have practiced thinking clearly under pressure. This confidence is grounded, not performative. It does not need reinforcement from others because it is supported by experience. Psychological advantage also reshapes relationships. You listen more carefully. You speak with intention. You do not need to dominate or withdraw to feel secure. Boundaries become natural, not defensive. Respect follows because your behavior is predictable and steady. This stability influences environments subtly. People respond differently when they sense clarity and self-control. Living with advantage does not mean winning every interaction or achieving constant success. It means losing less to avoidable mistakes, emotional reactions, and misaligned choices. These avoided losses compound just as powerfully as visible wins. Over time, the gap widens between those who live reactively and those who live deliberately. Advantage becomes less about effort and more about positioning. You are simply operating from a place that makes progress more likely. When this mindset is sustained, winning stops feeling like an event. It becomes a byproduct. The world does not change dramatically. You do. And that difference quietly shapes everything that follows.
Winning becomes inevitable when behavior aligns consistently with reality rather than emotion, impulse, or illusion. This inevitability is not dramatic or sudden. It is gradual, almost unnoticeable at first. While others rely on motivation, luck, or intensity, you rely on systems of thought that reduce error and compound progress. Over time, this difference widens, not because you are extraordinary, but because you are aligned. Psychological advantage removes friction. You waste less energy on doubt, reaction, and self-sabotage. Your decisions improve not because you think harder, but because you think cleaner. You make fewer unnecessary moves and recover faster when mistakes occur. This efficiency creates momentum that feels calm rather than frantic. Consistency replaces volatility. When your thinking is clear, your behavior stabilizes. When behavior stabilizes, results become predictable. Predictability is often mistaken for luck by those who do not see the process behind it. Winning also becomes inevitable because your identity no longer conflicts with your goals. You are not forcing habits that contradict who you believe yourself to be. Your standards match your direction. This alignment removes internal resistance, allowing effort to flow instead of grind. Progress accelerates quietly. Another reason winning becomes inevitable is that you lose less. Most people are defeated by avoidable errors, emotional reactions, and short-term thinking. When these losses are reduced, outcomes improve automatically. You do not need dramatic victories, you simply stop handing advantage away. Over time, this restraint compounds. Finally, inevitability comes from endurance. Many people quit mentally long before outcomes are decided. They grow impatient, distracted, or discouraged. You remain present. You continue refining rather than restarting. While others reset, you build. This persistence is not loud or heroic, it is steady. In a world dominated by reaction and noise, steadiness is rare. That rarity creates separation. When clear thinking, disciplined action, and emotional control persist long enough, winning stops being a question of if, it becomes a matter of when.
Chapter 10. Environment and Leverage. Winning is rarely the result of constant self-control. It is more often the result of environments that make the right actions easier and the wrong actions harder. People without psychological advantage rely on willpower to fight their surroundings. People with advantage redesign their surroundings to work in their favor. This shift reduces friction and preserves energy for decisions that truly matter. Your environment includes more than physical space. It includes routines, social circles, information sources, and default options. Each of these quietly influences behavior. When the environment is misaligned, progress requires constant effort. When it is aligned, progress feels natural. Advantage begins by noticing what repeatedly pulls you off course. Distraction, temptation, and unnecessary complexity are not personal failures, they are environmental signals. High-leverage individuals remove or limit exposure to these signals rather than blaming themselves for responding to them. Designing a supportive environment means placing cues where desired behavior begins. Tools are visible, distractions are hidden, commitments are scheduled, decisions are pre-made. This reduces the need to negotiate with yourself throughout the day. When fewer decisions are required, clarity improves. Another element is social environment. The people around you normalize certain behaviors and standards. Consistent exposure shapes identity. Psychological advantage grows when your environment reflects the standards you want to maintain rather than the habits you are trying to escape. This does not require isolation, but it does require selectivity. Environment also includes mental inputs. What you consume repeatedly becomes familiar, then acceptable, then influential. Curating information protects focus and reinforces direction. Noise weakens leverage. Signal strengthens it. Designing environment is not about control, it is about alignment. When surroundings support intention, discipline becomes lighter and progress becomes predictable. Over time, this quiet leverage compounds. While others rely on effort alone, you rely on structure. Structure does not get tired. It does not negotiate. It simply works.
Progress often stalls, not because of lack of effort, but because of friction that goes unnoticed. Hidden sabotage rarely announces itself as resistance. It appears as small inconveniences, distractions, and delays that slowly drain momentum. Psychological advantage comes from identifying and removing these points of friction before they accumulate. Every repeated action carries a cost. When the cost is high, consistency fails. When the cost is low, habits stick. Winners understand that reducing friction is more effective than increasing motivation. They ask what makes the right action difficult and the wrong action easy. Then they reverse it. Hidden sabotage also exists internally. Unclear goals, conflicting priorities, and unresolved decisions create mental drag. This drag consumes attention and creates fatigue without progress. Removing it requires closure. Decisions must be made,
standards defined, and ambiguity reduced. Clarity eliminates friction more effectively than force. Technology is another common source of sabotage. Notifications, constant connectivity, and endless information streams fracture attention. While these tools promise efficiency, unmanaged use erodes focus. Psychological advantage involves deliberate boundaries. Tools are used intentionally rather than reactively. This protects depth of thought and preserves mental energy. Friction also comes from social expectations. Obligations that conflict with goals create quiet resistance. Saying yes too often disperses effort. Advantage grows when boundaries are respected consistently. This is not about avoidance, it is about alignment. Energy is finite. Where it goes determines outcomes. Removing friction does not require perfection, it requires observation. When progress slows, something is in the way. Identifying that obstacle is often easier than pushing harder. Small adjustments create disproportionate gains. Over time, reduced friction compounds. Effort produces more return. Momentum sustains itself. While others struggle against invisible resistance, you move forward with less strain. This ease is not laziness, it is leverage applied intelligently.
Chapter 11. Failure, Feedback, and Adaptation. Failure is often treated as a verdict on ability rather than a source of data. This misunderstanding causes many people to retreat, defend, or repeat the same mistakes emotionally. Psychological advantage comes from reframing failure as information. When failure is stripped of identity and emotion, it becomes a signal that guides adjustment rather than a reason to stop. Every outcome contains feedback. The problem is not that people fail. The problem is that they fail without extracting value. Strategic thinkers separate the event from the interpretation. They ask what specifically did not work, why it did not work, and what can be changed next time. This approach transforms loss into insight. Failure becomes directional rather than discouraging. Using failure strategically also requires timing. Immediate emotional reactions distort analysis. Space creates clarity. When emotions settle, patterns emerge. You begin to see whether failure resulted from poor preparation, flawed assumptions, external variables, or execution errors. Each category demands a different response. Without this distinction, people apply the wrong fixes and repeat the cycle. Psychological advantage also involves resisting the urge to dramatize failure. Not every setback is significant. Overreacting wastes energy and erodes confidence. Underreacting prevents learning. Balanced response preserves momentum. The goal is not emotional numbness, but proportional reaction. Another key element is ownership. Strategic use of failure requires responsibility without self-punishment. Blame removes control. Ownership restores it. When you take responsibility for what you can influence, adaptation becomes possible. Failure also tests commitment. Many people abandon paths prematurely because early results are imperfect. Those with advantage expect friction. They remain engaged long enough for feedback to accumulate. Over time, this persistence sharpens accuracy. Decisions improve. Timing improves. Outcomes improve. When failure is treated as instruction rather than judgment, progress accelerates. You stop fearing mistakes and start using them. In competitive environments, this shift creates separation because while others avoid failure, you learn faster. And learning speed is one of the most reliable advantages available.
Adaptation is the ability to change direction without losing momentum. In competitive environments, conditions rarely remain stable. Strategies that worked yesterday can become ineffective quickly. Psychological advantage belongs to those who adjust early rather than defend outdated approaches. Many people delay adaptation because change feels like admitting failure. In reality, refusing to adapt is the real liability. Fast adapters are not inconsistent, they are responsive. They separate commitment to outcomes from attachment to methods. When results shift, they update tactics without questioning identity or purpose. This flexibility preserves progress when others stall. Adaptation begins with attention. You must notice when reality no longer matches expectation. This requires honesty. Denial delays adjustment. Rationalization protects ego but costs time. Advantage comes from acknowledging mismatches quickly and responding without drama. Speed matters because small misalignments compound if ignored. Another key element is experimentation. Adaptation requires trying small changes rather than making sweeping reversals. Controlled adjustment reduces risk and provides clearer feedback. Each iteration refines accuracy. This process favors those who move thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Emotional regulation supports adaptation. Strong emotion narrows thinking and locks people into rigid positions. When calm is maintained, options remain visible. This allows you to pivot without panic or paralysis. Adaptation also depends on learning speed. Those who reflect consistently extract more value from experience. They identify patterns sooner and avoid repeating errors. Over time, this creates a widening gap between those who learn deliberately and those who rely on habit. Social pressure often resists adaptation. Changing course can invite judgment. Advantage requires tolerating misunderstanding temporarily in exchange for better long-term outcomes. Those who adapt fastest are often criticized first and validated later. In dynamic environments, success does not belong to the strongest or the smartest. It belongs to those who adjust before conditions force them to. When adaptation becomes habitual, uncertainty loses its threat. Change becomes manageable. While others cling to familiarity, you remain aligned with reality. That alignment is what allows progress to continue when paths shift unexpectedly.
Chapter 12. Compounding and Long-Term Positioning. The greatest advantages in life rarely come from single dramatic actions. They come from small, repeated choices that seem insignificant in isolation but powerful in accumulation. This is the principle of compounding applied to psychology. When thinking, behavior, and standards improve slightly but consistently, outcomes change dramatically over time. Most people underestimate this process because they focus on immediate results. Psychological advantage belongs to those who focus on trajectory. Small advantages work quietly. A slightly better decision today reduces friction tomorrow. A slightly higher standard prevents a future mistake. A slightly calmer response preserves clarity under pressure. None of these moments look impressive, yet when repeated, they create distance that becomes impossible to ignore. Compounding favors patience because its rewards are delayed. Early progress feels slow. Improvement feels invisible. This is where most people abandon the process. They seek intensity, novelty, or shortcuts. Those with advantage remain consistent. They trust the mathematics of repetition. Positioning matters because compounding amplifies direction. Small improvements in the wrong direction compound just as reliably as good ones. This is why awareness is critical. Advantage requires aligning small behaviors with long-term intent. When alignment is present, time becomes leverage rather than enemy. Consistency also reduces decision fatigue. When behaviors are standardized, energy is conserved. You are no longer reinventing yourself daily. This stability allows focus to deepen. Depth outperforms bursts of effort. Over time, small advantages also reshape identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, thinks clearly, and responds deliberately. This identity reinforces behavior, accelerating the compounding effect. Psychological advantage is not about dominating others, it is about cooperating with time. When others reset repeatedly, you build. When others chase breakthroughs, you accumulate. Eventually, the gap becomes visible, not because you moved faster, but because you moved steadily in the right direction.
This is how small advantages become decisive, and why those who understand compounding rarely feel rushed.
Most advantages exist not because they are difficult to understand, but because they are difficult to sustain. Many people begin with enthusiasm, effort, and intention, but quit long before results have time to compound. Psychological advantage comes from choosing games that reward persistence and then staying long enough for the payoff to emerge. This is not stubbornness, it is strategic endurance. Long-term games require tolerance for boredom, ambiguity, and delayed feedback. Early stages often provide little validation. Progress feels slow and invisible. Those who expect quick confirmation interpret this silence as failure and disengage. Those with advantage understand that silence is part of the process. They measure progress by adherence, not applause. Playing long games also requires resisting comparison. When you compare early chapters of your journey to the finished outcomes of others, motivation erodes. Advantage comes from staying focused on your own timeline. Time spent watching others distracts from building position. Quiet consistency outperforms visible intensity. Another reason people quit early is discomfort with uncertainty. Long-term paths do not guarantee outcomes, they offer probabilities. Psychological advantage accepts this uncertainty without paralysis. You commit to direction, adjust with feedback, and continue forward. This flexibility keeps you engaged without demanding certainty. Endurance is strengthened by meaning. When the game you are playing aligns with values rather than ego, persistence becomes easier. You are not chasing validation, you are building something coherent. This reduces emotional volatility and prevents burnout. Playing games others quit too early also creates scarcity. Few people remain committed long enough to benefit from compounding. When you do, competition thins naturally. Progress accelerates because fewer people are still present. This is not because you are exceptional, it is because you stayed. Over time, staying becomes strategy. While others restart repeatedly, you advance quietly. In environments where most people abandon effort prematurely, endurance itself becomes advantage. When you commit to the long game and remain adaptable, winning does not require force. It emerges as a consequence of patience applied consistently.
Outro. The quiet advantage. The psychology of advantage is not something you switch on in dramatic moments. It is something you practice quietly, daily, often unnoticed. By now, you have seen that winning is rarely about intensity, talent, or luck. It is about alignment. Alignment between how you think, how you decide, and how you act when no one is watching. This alignment reduces friction and allows progress to compound naturally over time. You no longer rely on bursts of motivation or external validation. You rely on clarity, discipline, and consistency. Advantage becomes internal rather than situational. What changes first is not the world around you, but your relationship with it. Challenges feel less personal. Setbacks feel more instructive. Pressure feels manageable rather than overwhelming. You stop reacting to noise and start responding to reality. This shift is subtle, but its effects are lasting. You begin to lose less to avoidable mistakes. You conserve energy by designing better systems. You adapt faster because you are not defending outdated identities. Over time, these changes create space. Space to think, space to choose, space to move deliberately while others rush. The result is not constant winning, but steady progress in environments where most people stall. This way of operating does not require perfection, it requires commitment. Commitment to observing your mind honestly, correcting course when necessary, and playing games long enough for effort to matter. You will still face uncertainty, you will still make mistakes, but you will recover faster and learn more consistently. That is the quiet advantage. As you move forward, remember that advantage is not something you prove, it is something you embody. It shows in patience, in restraint, and in the ability to remain clear under pressure. When these traits are practiced long enough, outcomes begin to align naturally. Winning stops feeling dramatic or fragile. It feels inevitable, not because success is guaranteed, but because your process no longer works against you. When thinking is clean, standards are clear, and direction is steady, progress follows. This is not the end of a lesson. It is the beginning of a way of operating. Carry it forward calmly. Let time do its work.
Psychological advantage ultimately turns you into the constant in changing environments. While conditions shift, people rotate, and circumstances fluctuate, your way of thinking remains steady. This steadiness is what allows progress to continue when momentum elsewhere collapses. You no longer depend on perfect conditions to move forward. You operate effectively within imperfect ones. That reliability becomes your signature. Over time, you begin to notice that situations which once felt destabilizing now feel familiar. Pressure no longer demands reaction. Uncertainty no longer demands reassurance. You trust your ability to assess, decide, and adjust. This trust is earned, not imagined. It comes from repeated evidence that you can remain clear when outcomes are unclear. As this trust deepens, hesitation fades. You stop waiting for permission, confidence, or certainty. You move when alignment is present, not when fear disappears. Another shift occurs quietly. You stop needing to explain yourself. When your actions are consistent and your standards are visible, justification becomes unnecessary. People sense coherence. They may not understand your process, but they respond to its results. Influence grows naturally when behavior is predictable and grounded. You are no longer pulled into unnecessary battles or comparisons. Your energy is reserved for movement rather than defense. Becoming the constant also means accepting that advantage does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly while attention is elsewhere. Others may not notice progress until the gap is undeniable. This does not require secrecy or superiority. It requires patience. Time rewards those who stay aligned longer than others can tolerate. In the end, psychological advantage is less about winning moments and more about winning trajectories. You are not chasing outcomes, you are shaping direction. Direction determines destination, even when speed varies. As you continue forward, remember that clarity is renewable, discipline is buildable, and resilience is trainable. None of this ends here. The advantage grows as long as you practice it. Stay consistent, stay observant, stay patient. When you do, progress becomes less fragile and more permanent. You do not need to rush the future. You are already positioned to meet it.